Fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it.
When I was 19, working unarmed security, I was placed as a flex officer in a retirement home while the regular officer went on vacation. The first 2 shifts were learning the main care hospice building and learning the apartment and cottage buildings for the independent seniors. Usually we only had to check the outer buildings a couple of times a night to make sure no one was wandering around or no wildlife were getting in the trash. But my experiences began in the main building on the second shift after the regular officer had left for his vacation. One of the morbid duties that wasn't an overly often occurrence was escorting a body from the facility with the coroner and usually the family of the resident. On that night, a very elderly woman passed around 1 a.m. with her daughter and grandsons around her. Just after 1:45 a.m., I greeted the coroner at the service entrance and we took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The ride was unsettling. Both myself and the coroner were in absolute silence, in an elevator ride that seemed to feel hours long. My eyes were fixated on the gurney, donning a reddish body bag with a funeral home logo. I stood at the room door as the family cried as the nurse and coroner took possession of the woman's now lifeless form. All of us, including the family, walked onto the elevator to go to the ground level to see her off in the medical van. And as it pulled away, the grandsons thanked me and shook my hand for my assistance, although I felt as I had done nothing. For the rest of the night, it seemed slow yet eerie. I kept thinking about that gurney with the body bag and how life is so uncertain. The following night, I was sitting at the welcome desk, sitting across from the on-duty nurse who had dozed off. I was reading a book about the history of the occult when I noticed from across the main reception hall the dessert carousel machine with its dim, soft white light flickered. It didn't flicker as it would if it was an electric fault, but instead as if someone was standing in front of it or had walked past it. I walked out to see if a resident was maybe looking for a late night treat, but the area was void of anyone but myself. I brushed off the oddity as just my eyes acting up, but as soon as I returned to the desk, the grand piano that sat halfway between the dessert carousel and my desk struck 3 keys. I began to get spooked, so I decided now was the best time to do a property check. As I was returning down the last resident hall towards the reception area, I heard the music of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. I felt my blood go cold. I staggered towards the reception area, hoping to see a resident or even the nurse. But as soon as I hit the threshold into the reception area, it fell dead silent. I nervously checked to see if it were a player's piano, but found that it required a pianist. As I was inspecting the piano with my light, the nurse walked over. "Why did you stop playing? It was really nice." I turned with confusion and a little fear. That wasn't me. The nurse's face went white. "Stone, do you know what time it is?" She extended her wrist to where I saw the time, 1:07 a.m. We both went out to the smoking area, which was absolutely not permitted for resident safety reasons. Shortly after, the nurse refused to be left alone, so I accompanied her while she did her rounds, checking on all the residents. While on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down from the recently deceased woman's room, we heard faint music. The family was still in the process of removing her items. One item left on her nightstand we found was the source of the soft haunting song. Sitting there was a small music box, playing a haunting version of Moonlight Sonata. I've been working armed security for nearly a decade now, but I still remember working unarmed when I started out in my early 20s. I worked my way to a trusted position with my agency, where at 20 years old, I was assigned to the Colorado Springs Deaf and Blind School. At the time, only senior, more experienced officers were permitted to work there at all, but I was given the 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. shifts, Monday nights through Saturday mornings. A little backstory on the Deaf and Blind School. It was opened in the early 1870s and was where the burdened children of the state were sent to learn and live. But many were put to work there as laborers, working fields or manufacturing items. Because of a number of ailments, accidents, or pre-existing health conditions, a large number of children and staff passed while there, to where in the early 1880s a small cemetery was created, and formerly at the intersection of Pikes Peak Avenue and Institute Street. Growing up in Colorado Springs, I was always told ghost stories about the flesh-eating bacteria on stuffed taxidermy animals, ghosts walking in buildings, and the haunted service tunnels below the school connecting to the old train depot, but never really believed it. Fast forward to my 3rd month posted there, 2 nights before my 21st birthday, and a full week before students returned for the fall semester for actual special needs schooling, and I had my first encounter in the gym. While checking the boys' locker room, a solid black figure ran past the showers. I rushed to find the intruder, not knowing what I would have done. If I had found it, as I was completely unarmed except for a flashlight. After clearing the building twice and checking all the doors multiple times, I just took it as my imagination. The night of my birthday is when everything got much weirder. The shift change went as normal, and everything was fine up until my 2:30 a.m. property and building checks. When I went into the carriage house's top floor, where the school stores all the spare desks and modern school equipment, it appeared that a person was standing in the back corner, near the older stairs. I shouted at the figure and began to charge towards him. In a frenzy, I hurried to cut him off at the 1st floor door. But when I got to the door, it was still locked with the interior bolt. I searched the 1st floor when I found the doors to the service tunnels opened. On my first day, I was told not to enter the tunnels alone as they expanded for miles in a labyrinth, and before I went in, I didn't contact a supervisor. I felt as if I walked for hours, but after only a few minutes, I heard in a very soft voice, almost like a kid's voice,
"Happy birthday, Mr. Officer."
The next thing I knew, my very angry supervisor, the school's maintenance director, and 2 CSPD officers were shaking me by my shoulders. My supervisor then informed me I missed my 3 a.m. check-in and was sitting in a corner of the tunnels in the dark for over 3 hours. We all left the tunnels and carriage house to see that the sun was beginning to rise. Later that day, my boss reassigned me to a different location after I was cleared from a doctor to work. I don't fully know what I saw or what was in those buildings, but it still gives me the chills. I'll never forget the voice that made me black out for so long.
Happy birthday, Mr. Officer.
I'm an armed private security officer in Colorado Springs, and over the last few months, my company has been doing a specific property check within a community we already patrol at night. 1315 Wood Avenue has had an interesting past, better known as the Burns Mansion on the Old Millionaires Row in the Old North End. James Ferguson Burns, whom died in Colorado Springs, was a very wealthy man across his numerous endeavors in the greater Colorado area. His death was suspected in the mansion on September 23rd, 1917, as well as a few servants on the property. Earlier this year, 2020, acting as an 8-unit apartment building, a suspicious death occurred on property, prompting the city to step in. After conducting the police and forensic investigation of the death, the city immediately shut down the entire property to be renovated and brought up to modern code. But this event displaced all the tenants and families with no warning. It was said that James Burns dabbled in spiritualism via spirit boards and mediums. On the night of September 21st, I was the patrol officer on duty for that area. Our normal SOP for the property is check around the enormous house to ensure the primary structure is secured and that the area's homeless have not made entry. After dismounting from my cruiser, I began to check the street side of the property, starting with the front cellar access, which had no out of the normal signs. A discarded coffee cup from one of the contractors, a few piles of wood, etc. I started towards the grand patio that nearly wraps around the whole front-facing side. At the far end, I noticed the porch swing was slightly swaying side to side, not back and forth, but thought nothing of it as this home is an old location. I began around to the rear of the mansion, and as soon as I came around the gate, I heard a staggered elder man's voice, faintly coming from the servants' quarters on the second floor of the carriage house. So instead of checking the rear of the mansion first, I followed SOP and went straight to investigate the sounds. At the mouth to the carriage house was all the discarded personal items of the tenants that were displaced and were unable to collect, making a path to the stairs an uneasy task. Old furniture, toys, photos, and such and the like covered most of the ground. While trying not to fall while making my way, I heard the elderly voice again, but it was still faint and unintelligible. Now I know that the possibility of an intruder was nearly 100%. I drew my sidearm and clasped my light between my fingers. I announced myself in the loudest command tone I could manage, leaving no doubt that I wouldn't be heard. After the second attempt of commanding that anyone identify themselves failed, I moved up the stairs. The second level is in such a state of decay that it looked as if it were the setting of a horror movie. After clearing the small 4-room area, I had only a small walk-in closet left, thinking surely this is where the subject is. I kept my sidearm level as I whipped the door open with my opposite hand. Nothing occupied this space. I holstered my weapon, thinking maybe I had just had too much or too little caffeine, or a raccoon was being playful. I exited the carriage house to resume checking the mansion door barricades to ensure they were either locked or undamaged. While at the parlor doorway, I saw a shadow from behind the door under the slight split at the bottom. Alarmed, I ran to the parlor window, flashing the entire room to see who in the hell was walking around inside. Again, nothing. No sign that anything had been inside since earlier that day. Now pissed that so many weird things were happening, I checked the rest of the doors, which were all locked. I headed back to the cruiser and lit a cigarette. As I took a long, exasperated drag, the inside lights flicked off briefly. I look up to the second floor where a discolored face peered out before the lights sprang back on. I flicked my butt and said to myself, yeah, screw that. Jumped into the car and called out 1315 code 4, clearing. Two years ago, with my current armed security company, we had a shopping center in the suburb of Rock Rimmon, Colorado Springs. In the shopping center was an old closed-down McDonald's. Local legend is that this McDonald's was haunted. Dead former employees, Indian burial ground, cursed. The story varied from high school to high school, and growing up a few miles away, everyone knew the legend. My company started providing services to the whole shopping center due to teens hanging out after hours, homeless camping in front of shops, and in the self-service car wash. But this McDonald's was abandoned, closed for a long time. Sometimes we would have to respond to calls from the property manager about wannabe ghost hunters or Wiccans trying to get in to do what have you. Well, one warm night in August, while training a new hire, we were walking around looking for kids or homeless. when from the car wash, we heard an ear-shattering scream from inside the McDonald's. We ran straight over, flashlights and guns drawn, scanning every corner of the exterior structure. We had no key to access the inside, but were permitted to enter if someone had forced their way in. But there were no signs of entry, no damage. The fire ladder to the roof was still up. So confused, we looked at each other, wondering how the scream could have come from inside. The new guy was fresh out of the army and was new to the area, so he had never heard the stories. I began telling every version I knew, while he kept shining his light through the windows to see if anyone was inside. While on the last iteration involving the Indian burial ground, the new guy yelled out in the least manliest scream I've ever heard. Without the words finding their way out, he just pointed to the window. I looked in from where he was standing. Standing in the opposite side of the store from the window stood a shadowy mass, about 6 feet tall, with large, white eyes. It stood there, examining us for a brief moment, then darted into the back kitchen area. I grabbed the new guy by his shirt and started running to the back door on the opposite side of the building, thinking some prankster would run out. But the door was still padlocked from the outside. We called the property manager and the CSPD out to search the building. When the property manager arrived and opened the door for the cops to clear the building, the property manager came over and asked us,
"Saw it, did ya?"
The 3 CSPD officers came out within a few minutes, saying nothing was inside. We got a call screen number for our report and went on to our next patrol property. For the rest of the night, the new guy was very quiet, saying very little, and after his first night solo on patrol, he ended up quitting the next day. No resignation, said very little, and handed over his uniforms and equipment. To this day, I don't know why he quit, and he wouldn't speak to anyone on staff after departing. So I wonder if that figure with the large white eyes still haunted him. As you know, I am an armed, uniformed security officer in my city. Well, 2 years ago, my company was providing services for a motel named the Knights Inn. The motel was preparing to shut down for a massive remodel, as well as a code and structural updates. Now, the motel was previously 2 separate motels, but when the Knights Inn bought it, they merged the properties into one. During nearly 20 years of running between both of the original motels, they saw some rather negative events. This location just happens to be within walking distance from the county jail. So when a number of persons were released from custody, they found their way to this motel over the years. Murders, drug overdoses, and suicides were all reported in this property. All these dark events left negative imprints on these grounds. Fast forward to when I worked on property during the overnight hours, and the 3 events that happened during 3 separate shifts, and also one I responded to as a cover officer. The first was on my 4th shift. The first few shifts went very slow and boring. No one had told my staff the history of the property at this point. Well, the second to last week of operation, I was helping the on-duty night auditor prepare the morning breakfast bar, and the kitchen was in a part of the building where a long shut-down restaurant once was. The auditor was preparing waffle batter and filling pitchers of orange juice when an unopened 12-pack of canned soda exploded next to a service access stairwell that was padlocked from the inside of the service hallway to the kitchen. The auditor's scream was chilling as well as deafening. Well, due to some of the less than upstanding guests that they'd rent rooms to, I automatically began down the stairs to look for the culprit, only to find that the doors were still secured and no one could have entered through them. I then stuck my finger in the puddle of soda, thinking that maybe it had been overheated or something, causing them to burst, but no, it was still slightly cool. As I looked at the auditor, who was still shaking and holding a small kitchen knife and trying to calm her down, we both heard a loud little girl giggle, but it sounded unusual. Needless to say, we both bolted from the kitchen back to the main desk. 5 minutes later, the auditor told me, "No one checked in tonight that has kids." The following week, and the last week of the location being open before the remodel, I was doing standard grounds patrolling, making sure no doors were unsecured or people fighting. Just about the time I finished, I get a call from the front desk, calling us a code 6 priority. I ran back to the office, nearly tripping on the stairs in the courtyard. Once I arrived, I saw a young black woman with her daughter, just the cutest little 3-year-old. The mother was crying uncontrollably, but managed to tell me her husband was not himself, that after nearly an hour in their room, he pulled a knife out of nowhere and started wildly swinging it in the room and at his wife and kid. The wife said that he hates weapons and wouldn't have had one, so I began searching the grounds for the man. I found him sitting in a dark corner of the courtyard area. He had the knife in his hand and was blankly staring ahead. Once the light hit the knife, I saw blood. Then I noticed he was bleeding. I ordered that he drop the knife as he slowly started to walk towards me. I repeated a second time. Then, on the third order, I drew my weapon and ordered that he stop and to think about his kid. Right as I did, 3 local officers sprang out from behind me, 2 with their tasers drawn. What happened quickly after was I heard the deputy order, then what followed was taser, taser, taser. The local officers took the man into custody and was having me fill out a statement when I overheard 2 of the deputies saying, "You want to know what's odd? The room they're staying in had a suspicious death a few days ago, but detectives said it was a drug-induced suicide." The other deputy replied, "What are the odds this guy went nuts?" I think personally that that's a little odd that the man committed suicide. Come to find out, he cut his arms till he bled out. And then a week later, another man loses his mind, cuts himself up, and is unresponsive the whole time while he is being spoken to. The most damning paranormal event, in my opinion, that happened was the first week closed for remodeling. I was walking around the inside and another officer stopped in to hang out on his break. I made the suggestion that we sit in the old restaurant and see if the place was for real haunted, and he reluctantly agreed. Using a spirit box app on my phone, we sat and asked questions. For about 20 minutes nothing came through, and we joked that maybe the place wasn't haunted after all. I thought I saw something across the room, so I tried to light it. But come to find my flashlight had died. So while sitting at the table, I pulled my taser out of the holster and we sat in a nearly pitch black room, ready to use its light if needed. Instantly, the spirit box app said, "Yellow, gun," in the same voice. Now mind you, that me and this other officer had the same level of training and were fully certified through the city. But his response was, "The F does it mean by yellow gun?" I then proceeded to place my taser on the table and turned its light on. I've never heard so many F-bombs as he stormed out of the room. The final incident I am still unsure of, but for the one phrase the suspect yelled,
"There will be more ghosts here tonight if you enter."
So 4 weeks after the motel closed, I was working a city patrol when the on-duty officer called for priority backup from all available officers on duty. Sam 262 to Knights Inn. What is the situation? The officer responded. 46 persons had made enter into the back building and barricaded themselves into a room. I was the first responding officer, just after 3 a.m, and meet with the on-duty site officer. As we were talking, a third officer arrived and we heard 3 gunshots ring out from down the hallway. At this time, we contacted the local sheriff's office about the situation. Within minutes, several deputies arrived wearing active shooter vests and helmets. They attempted to reach the room as we watched from the end of the hallway. 5 more shots rang out from the doorway, and luckily no one was struck. The deputies fell back to the end of the hallway where the 3 of us were. A supervisor for the deputies ordered 4 to watch the hallway as the rest took position around the building. We asked what we needed to do, and he replied to block the entrances to the property and that no one comes on that isn't an officer. So basically, we were to keep out the impending reporters. SWAT arrived and the deputies pulled back and SWAT took position. The whole time the suspects saw the activity from the windows and holes in the door. A lieutenant with SWAT and a public relations officer came over to me and the other guys on my staff. And while asking us what happened before deputies responded, we all heard from a broken out window, "There'll be more ghosts here tonight if you enter." Around 5 a.m, the SWAT armored vehicle pulled up next to the back of the building, and we hear 3 thumps. SWAT shot OC shells into the room before breaching from the windows and doorway. And just as soon as we hear the thumps and see the smoke, 5 of the suspects were being carried out, and a 6th was being rushed out on a straight board to an ambulance. Come to find, the man with the pistol in the room took his 5 friends hostage and attempted to kill himself when SWAT breached. He later died in the hospital, so I wonder if he joined the other ghosts in the hotel. After that night, we no longer provided security at Knights Inn. 8 months later, it reopened as some new-aged hipster hotel. I haven't been to the property for some time now, even though I pass it whenever I work our South City patrol. I wonder how the property is and if paranormal activity still happens after the remodel. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed that video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. A huge thank you goes to Reddit user DJ Stone 1991 for allowing me to use these stories in tonight's video. A link to each story will be in the description below. If you have any stories you would like to share with me, please send them to my email, scarepapa@gmail.com. As always, a huge thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I really do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.